Why did her hands move like that? No one in the room could figure it out. They weren't shaking like someone terrified or cold. It was something else. A faint rhythmic tremor barely visible unless you were looking for it, rippling through her. Trigger hand as if her nerves were carrying a secret no one else could hear. Sergeant Sarah Phantom Mitchell knew they were watching, knew that in this final evaluation, every breath she took, every heartbeat, every shift of her fingers was being measured, analyzed, judged, but she didn't flinch. The firing line at Camp Pendleton stretched out before her like the edge of the world, the desert air dry against her lips, the heat of the California sun settling into her shoulders beneath the tan of her fatigues. Mitchell, Gunnery Sergeant Mike Iceman Thompson's voice cut through the stillness, calm but edged with command. You've been scoring high all week, but this is your stress level. No room for errors now. She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed pressed to the scope, her body aligned behind her custom .338 Lapua rifle, 1,000 meters downrange. The target shimmered in the heat haze, a white silhouette waiting for its verdict. Sensors taped to her forearm, neck, and chest relayed every micro-movement to the instructors behind her. The faint tremor in her hand registered on their screens, like a flaw waiting to be exploited. Her vitals are climbing. Came another voice from the monitoring station, micro-tremors increasing. Sarah inhaled, slow, deep. The air filled her lungs in a way that steadied her, not by stilling the tremor, but by matching it. Her finger brushed the trigger. The rifle cracked, the shot snapping across the field in an instant. A second later, the target dropped clean. Dead center, her accuracy was perfect, again, and still. The murmurs behind her continued. Under controlled conditions, she's fine, Master Sergeant James Steele Davis muttered, his arms folded. But combat isn't controlled. 19 hours in position, counter-snipers on you. Fatigue, adrenaline spikes, those tremors become liabilities. Sarah straightened, ejecting the spent casing, the metallic scent of gunpowder mixing with the dust in the air. She heard every word. Let them talk. Let them doubt. Staff Sergeant Maria Ghosh Chun, her primary instructor, stepped forward. Your technical knowledge is unmatched, Mitchell, but it's not just about math and muscle memory out there. It's about locking your body down when everything in you wants to move. Sarah finally met Chun's eyes. With respect, ma'am, you're misunderstanding what those tremors are. Her voice was steady, calm. They're not weakness. They're a sign my system is running hotter. My awareness spikes under stress. My nervous system is pulling in more data wind distance. Temperature faster than most people can process it. It wasn't arrogance. It was conviction. She had studied the biomechanics of precision shooting, like someone learning their own heartbeat. She knew what her body was doing, even if no one else believed her. But belief didn't matter now. She needed a score 8 months later. She'd have more than a score. She'd have the longest confirmed shot in domestic law enforcement history. But back then, she only had a stubborn theory and a reputation that was hanging by a thread. The morning was already hot by the time she packed up her rifle. The Pacific breeze carried the scent of salt over the base, a reminder that the world beyond the range was vast and indifferent to Marine Corps' evaluations. She walked past the instructors without looking for approval, past the cluster of recruits who'd been watching her, past the rows of rifles racked in the armory. Inside, her hands still carried the faint vibration of the shot, not weakness, but a pulse of memory. She thought about her father, about the days on the old hunting range outside Reno, where the wind came howling down from the mountains and the cold made your bones ache. He'd been the first to notice the tremor, not with worry, but with curiosity. You feel that? He'd asked, tapping her wrist. Feels like your body's alive in a way most people don't get. Learn it. Don't fight it. That voice had stayed with her through boot camp, through Scout Sniper School, through every doubt thrown her way. But Camp Pendleton wasn't forgiving. and neither were the men and women deciding her future. When she returned to the barracks, the email was waiting in her inbox. Final evaluation. PASSCONDITIONL conditional. It wasn't the word she wanted. It meant she was good enough. Barely, but with an asterisk. The chorus was willing to send her forward, but her file would carry the note about physiological instability under stress. Months passed. She threw herself into field assignments, shadowing senior snipers, refining her breathing patterns, teaching herself to use the tremor as a metronome. And yet, the doubt followed her. Every time her hand moved under pressure, she could feel eyes on her. And then, in the early winter, the call came. It was a secure line, her CO's voice clipped and urgent. "Pack your gear, Mitchell. You're headed to Montana. Operation Longshot." She didn't recognize the name, not yet. When the Black Hawk touched down outside Glacier National Park, the air was sharp and cold enough to sting her lungs. The mountains rose like jagged teeth against a sky so clear it looked like glass. A temporary command center had been erected. In the shadow of a rocky ridge, the hum of generators and the scent of diesel cutting through the pine air. Inside the tent, a map of Devil's Canyon was spread across a table. Markers tracing choke points, bunker locations, patrol routes. Colonel Patricia Iron Lady Jackson was already speaking when Sarah stepped in. "Sergeant Mitchell, you're with Sniper Team Alpha. Your job is precision fire support for our breach teams." Sarah's eyes locked on the map. The bunker they were targeting sat on a rocky outcrop 3.5 kilometers from the nearest firing position. The only way to get a clean shot was from an exposed ledge code-named Observation Post Bravo. The range made her pulse quicken not with fear, but with the recognition of possibility. Master Sergeant Davis was there too, arms folded just like at Pendleton. "Mitchell, this isn't training. You'll be at max range, under observation, maybe taking return fire." Those tremors, she cut him off with a quiet, "I know." But what she didn't say, what she couldn't say yet, was that she'd been waiting for exactly this kind of shot. That night, as she cleaned her rifle in the dim glow of a field lantern, Corporal Marcus Eagle Eye Williams dropped onto the crate beside her. He was her spotter for the mission. Younger than her by 3 years, but with eyes so sharp they seemed to cut through haze. "You've seen the range on this, right?" he asked, watching her swab the barrel. "Yeah. You think it's possible?" Sarah slid the cleaning rod back into its pouch, her hand steady in the firelight. "I think it's what I'm here for." At 0400, the mountains were a world of shadows and breath fog. They moved slow, each step careful, rifle slung, gear secured to keep noise to a whisper. By the time they reached the ledge, the horizon was just starting to pale. Observation Post Bravo was as unforgiving as the briefing had promised: bare rock, minimal cover, a sheer drop on one side. From here, the bunker was a distant gray shape against the cliff, the reinforced observation window barely visible to the naked eye. Eagle Eye set up his spotting scope. Range confirmed, 3,520 meters. Winds 8 to 12 from the northwest, shifting southwest. Temp 42. Barometrics 3015. Sarah unfolded the bipod, her scope aligning with the tiny, flickering target. Through the glass, the bunker seemed impossibly far away, and yet the math was already forming in her head: drop, drift, rotation, temperature, altitude. She felt the tremor in her hand begin, like a quiet drumbeat in her blood, and instead of tightening against it, she let it happen. The shot would come later. But already, she could feel it in her bones. The one moment that would define whether the word conditional would haunt her forever or vanish into history. What was worse, the distance or the waiting? No one could decide. For Sarah, it was both. The ledge was nothing more than a sliver of rock, exposed to wind and sky, and the bunker was a gray smudge in a landscape that seemed to stretch into forever. They had gotten into position hours before first light. Now, The sun was creeping higher, turning the peaks around Devil's Canyon into jagged silhouettes that burned at the edges. The air was thin here, sharp in her lungs. Below, the valley was a patchwork of pine and granite, shadows shifting with the wind. Somewhere down there, patrols were moving. They didn't know exactly where, but the occasional glint of sunlight off binoculars told her enough. Enemy eyes were out there, looking for them. Eagle Eye, she whispered, keeping her voice low and flat. Update. He didn't look away from the spotting scope. Winds holding at 9 from the west, gusting to 12. Barometric pressure steady. Thermal currents rising from the valley floor. Thermals invisible, twisting rivers of air that could push a bullet just far enough off course to ruin everything. Most snipers hated them. Sarah didn't hate them, she respected them, the way a sailor respects. A strong tide. She blinked slowly, her eye pressed to the scope, and tried to read the faint shimmer in the air above the canyon floor. From this distance, Marcus Black's observation window was barely the size of a pinhead in her reticle, and he wasn't even there yet. The intelligence brief had said he only stepped into view every hour, during his radio checks that gave her 30, maybe 40 seconds. If she was lucky, 30 seconds to calculate everything drop. Drift, spin drift, Coriolis, density altitude, thermals, and send a bullet across more than 2 miles of hostile air. She let her mind drift for a moment, not away from the mission, but into the rhythm of it. It was something she'd learned. In sniper school, don't think about the shot as a single moment. Think of it as a sequence you're already part of. The sequence began with her breathing. In, hold out, hold in. It moved to her heartbeat, the subtle tremor in her hand syncing with that rhythm. Her instructors had never understood. Her tremor wasn't random. It was precise, tied to her body's own metronome. When she learned to ride it instead of fight it, the rest had started to click into place. Eagle Eye shifted slightly, his voice low. Movement on the ridge. 3 o'clock. Patrol. 4 men. Moving slow. Sarah's hands tightened slightly on the stock. Distance? 400 meters and closing. They're sweeping. They were too far to see the sniper team yet, but the patrol's path would take them dangerously close to the ledge. If one of them strayed too far toward the edge, the game would be over before it began. Stay low, Sarah whispered. The minutes stretched thin. The patrol moved in and out of view between the trees, rifles slung casually, not expecting trouble but not careless either. One stopped, scanning the slope with binoculars. Sarah froze, not even daring to blink. The rock beneath her seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. After what felt like forever, the patrol moved on, disappearing over a rise. Eagle Eye exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and tension. Close one. She said nothing. In this work, silence was its own form of control. The hours dragged on. The sun climbed higher, heating the rock until it radiated against her chest and arms. Her muscles ached from holding position, her elbows pressed into the rough stone. Every so often, Eagle Eye fed her new environmental data slight wind shifts, subtle changes in temperature, the way the thermals seemed to strengthen as the day warmed. She stored it all, layer upon layer of information building in her mind, waiting for the moment it would matter. And then the voice crackled in her earpiece. Alpha Team, Overwatch, target emerging. Stand by. Her body went still, but inside, everything sharpened. The tremor in her hand began again, steady, almost comforting. Eagle Eye, range check. 3-5-2-0. Wind just shifted 10 from the west. She adjusted the scope, feeling the stock against her cheek, the world narrowing to the circle of glass before her. Through it, Marcus Black appeared, a man in his late 40s. Lean, clean-shaven, wearing a headset, standing in front of a bank of equipment. He was just a figure behind reinforced glass. But Sarah knew the profile from the briefing. She also knew what his death would mean. 30 seconds. The calculations began instantly. her mind moving faster than her hands. Bullet drop about 1,200 inches. Wind drift, nearly 5 feet. Coriolis minor but measurable at this distance. Thermal lift from the valley floor variable. But she could read it in the shimmer of the air. She dialed her adjustments, fingers precise. Steady. Target moving. Eagle Eye warned. He's pacing. Compensating. Her breathing slowed even more. She felt her heartbeat in her fingers. Matched it. Waited. 20 seconds. Her world shrank to the crosshairs and the man in the window. He turned slightly, speaking into his radio. 15 seconds. She shifted her aim a fraction, knowing that at this distance, even the smallest movement could mean the difference between history and failure. 10 seconds, her body went weightless, not from adrenaline, but from focus so deep it felt like falling. The tremor in her hand lined up with the rise and fall of her breath. 5 seconds. Phantom. Eagle Eye murmured. You've got the shot. Her finger took up the slack on the trigger. The world held its breath. She didn't fire. Not yet, in that last second. Something flickered at the edge of her vision movement near the bunker's lower level. She kept her aim steady, but her mind cataloged it instantly. 2 men in combat gear, moving quickly toward the ridge road. If they were couriers, they might be carrying orders. If they were scouts, they might be bringing back intel. Killing Black now would collapse the defense, but it might also trigger something else. A fallback plan, a kill order on the hostages. Her instincts told her to. Wait, why are you holding? Eagle Eye hissed. She didn't answer. She was watching Black, watching the 2 men outside, watching the shimmer of air above the canyon floor. If she fired now, she'd take the shot they'd come here for. But she'd lose the chance to understand what those 2 men were doing, and maybe lose the hostages with it. Her gut told her there was more here, something the brief hadn't covered. Black turned away from the window, his headset still on. The 30-second window was closing. She felt the clock running out in her pulse. She eased her finger off the trigger. The voice in her earpiece was sharp. Alpha, report. Why didn't you fire? Sarah's jaw tightened. Target left the window, waiting for next opportunity. The silence on the other end was heavy. She could imagine the faces in the command tent, anger, disbelief, maybe even the beginnings of a reprimand. Let them think what they wanted. She wasn't here to please them. She was here to end the siege, and something told her the shot they needed wasn't the one they were expecting. Hours later, as the sun slid west, the patrols intensified. Twice they had to shift slightly, using the rocks for cover as search teams worked their way up the slopes. Sarah's muscles burned from holding position. Sweat trickled down her neck. Every so often, she flexed her fingers just enough to keep the blood moving, then settled back into the stillness. Eagle Eye was quiet now, just feeding her data. No commentary. She knew he was thinking about the shot she hadn't taken. Alpha, target approaching window, stand by. This time, her pulse didn't jump. It settled. Through the scope, Black appeared again. Speaking into his headset, the 2 men she'd seen earlier were nowhere in sight. The thermals had shifted with the cooling air. The wind had dropped to 8. This was better, cleaner. She felt the tremor in her hand align with her breath, her body becoming part of the rifle. Eagle Eye, she whispered. Range confirmed? 3520, wind 8 from the west. Conditions optimal. Her mind did the math one last time. The adjustments were perfect. She could feel, not just in her head, but in her bones, the shot would be long, impossible by most standards. But this was exactly where she belonged. She took the slack out of the trigger, and this time, she didn't hesitate. The rifle cracked, a sound so sharp and sudden it seemed to carve the air itself. At 2,950 feet per second, the bullet leapt from the barrel, spinning in a perfect spiral, a glint of copper and steel invisible to the naked eye. For Sarah, time didn't slow. She knew that was a myth, but her awareness sharpened until every millisecond felt deliberate, distinct, The recoil pushed into her shoulder, solid, familiar. Her cheek stayed pressed to the stock, her eye never leaving the scope. She tracked the reticle on Black's position, her breathing unchanged, her body still fused with the rifle, as if it were another limb. In her ear, Eagle Eye was counting. 1 second. 2 seconds. The bullet arced upward first, climbing against gravity before the inevitable pull began. It sailed through the high mountain air, thinner here than at sea level, encountering wind layers that twisted and tugged at its path. Each one was a river, a forest Sarah had already mapped in her mind. 3 seconds. Somewhere below, the thermals rising from the canyon floor gave the projectile the faintest lift, just enough to hold its line. She had accounted for that too, reading the shimmer of heat like another language. 4. The Coriolis effect. So small at this scale, most shooters ignored, had been factored into her hold. The earth was turning under that bullet, and Sarah had rotated with it. Her aim shifted just enough to keep the line true. Point 2. Through the scope, she saw it, a tiny, almost imperceptible impact at the exact center of the reinforced observation glass. The pane fractured not in a spiderweb of shards, but in a single surgical entry. Black's head snapped. Back, he collapsed out of view. Target down. Eagle Eye breathed, then louder. Into the comes. Target down. Confirmed hit. Repeat. Target is neutralized. But Sarah didn't move. She kept her cheek to the stock, her eye on the scope. Not because she doubted the shot, but because she knew what would follow. When a leader falls, chaos follows, and chaos is its own kind of danger. Through the glass, she saw 2 figures rush into the command room. One grabbed the headset, Black had dropped. The other began gesturing wildly toward the outer defenses. Below, on the ridgeline in the bunker's perimeter, movement erupted. Gunfire crackled in the distance. Some positions were holding. Others were abandoning their posts. The clean, disciplined defense they'd seen for 6 months was unraveling in real time. Alpha, Overwatch. The tactical commander's voice came over the net, excitement barely contained. We're seeing multiple defensive positions collapsing, assault teams advancing. Keep your position, provide Overwatch as they breach. Eagle Eye adjusted his scope. Movement at the south wall. Looks like. Yeah, they're pulling back. No coordination. Sarah stayed still, scanning. It was happening just as the FBI analysts had predicted. Without Marcus Black's engineering mind directing the defense, the organization was crumbling, but she knew. Better than to assume it was over. For the next hour, she and Eagle Eye watched through glass and optics as the siege unwound. Federal assault teams moved in with cautious speed, taking advantage of the gaps. Resistance was sporadic, uncoordinated. More and more defenders dropped weapons, hands raised. Still, there were pockets of fight left in them corners of the bunker where loyalists dug in. Refusing to give up, Sarah took 2 more shots, both center mass, both dropping armed men who had pinned an FBI entry team behind a boulder field. Each time she fired, the distance felt almost casual now compared to that first impossible shot. Hostage. Team entering main level. Overwatch reported. Sarah's hand tightened on the rifle. This was the dangerous part. Desperate defenders could make reckless choices through her scope. She caught sight of movement inside one of the lower windows. A man, masked, shoving someone forward. The hostage stumbled, hands bound. Face pale, Sarah adjusted quickly. But the shot was bad. Too much risk of hitting the hostage. She tracked them instead, feeding location data over the net to the breach team. Minutes later, the report came back. Hostage secure. Sarah allowed herself a slow, controlled exhale. The sun was dipping behind the western peaks when the call came. All units, this is command. The bunker has been breached. Hostile forces are surrendering en masse. All hostages accounted for. Repeat, all hostages alive. Siege is over. The words hung in the thin mountain air. Siege over. For 6 months, this canyon had been a deadlock, a chokehold on the valley below, and now, in a single afternoon, it was broken. Eagle Eye grinned, leaning back from his scope. Hell of a day, Phantom. She didn't smile, not yet. The adrenaline was still in her system, her body still in the rhythm of Overwatch. She scanned the ridges, the tree lines, the bunker windows, making sure there were no last surprises. Only when the net went quiet, when the command channel filled with the chatter of extraction plans and logistics, did she finally ease her rifle from the bipod. Her muscles screamed as she straightened. She'd been lying in position for over 14 hours. Her elbows were raw from the rock. Her legs tingled from lack of blood flow. She rolled her shoulders, working the stiffness out. Eagle Eye was already breaking down the spotting scope. You realize that was the longest confirmed shot in domestic history, right? By like 800 meters. She said nothing, just began unloading her rifle, clearing the chamber, and slipping the bolt out. It wasn't the record she was thinking about. It was the fact that she had done exactly what they said she couldn't. Back at the command post, the air was thick with the smell of coffee and sweat. The tension replaced by relief and disbelief. Screens showed aerial feeds of the bunker complex, now crawling with federal agents. Carl Jackson met them at the entrance. "Mitchell," she said, her voice level but her eyes sharp. "What you accomplished today will be studied for decades. A 3,520-meter shot under those conditions isn't just exceptional, it redefines the envelope." Sarah nodded once, not out of modesty, but because she didn't know what to say to that. Master Sergeant Davis was waiting at the debrief table. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he shook his head. "I owe you an apology." She raised an eyebrow. "What I saw as weakness was your edge. Your body's stress response didn't hinder you. It made you sharper." She thought of the months of doubt, the quiet looks, the conditional pass stamped on her record. "You weren't wrong to doubt me," she said quietly. "You just didn't know what I was doing with it." Later, when the debriefs were done and the gear was stowed, she stepped outside into the cold Montana night. The sky was a mess of stars, the kind you only see far from cities. The air was so still, it felt like the world was holding its breath again. Her hands still trembled, just slightly, as she pulled off her gloves. And for the first time since the shot, she let herself smile, not because she had made history, but because she had proved, to herself most of all, that what everyone thought would break her was exactly what had carried her through. The chopper ride out of Devil's Canyon was quieter than she expected. Not silent. There was still the steady thump of rotors, the whine of the engine, the metallic rattle of gear, but no one spoke much. The assault team was strapped in a cross. From her, their faces lit in the cold green of the cabin lights. They'd been the first through the breach, the ones who'd pulled the hostages from the bunker, and even they just sat there now, helmets in their laps, eyes distant. Sarah kept her rifle between her knees, the bolt wrapped in an oilcloth. Every so often she felt her hand twitch, the after echo of 14 hours on that ledge. She let it happen. The valley below was black now. The only lights, the faint pinpricks from the command post and the headlights of the convoy carrying the freed hostages down the switchbacks. She tracked them with her eyes until the helicopter banked, the mountains swallowing them from view. When they landed, the command post was almost unrecognizable. The frantic, crowded energy of the operation had given way to a sort of stunned celebration. Laughter broke out in pockets. Hands clapped shoulders. The smell of coffee was stronger than ever, mixed with the scent of cold night air pushing through the tent flaps. Colonel Jackson was there to greet them. Her posture as crisp as it had been before the mission, but her voice warmer. "Welcome back, Alpha. Mission success." The hostages were already being flown out to medical facilities. Jackson's briefing was short congratulations. Confirmed. Elimination of Marcus Black. Bunker secured. 0 friendly casualties. The kind of numbers that rarely happened in real operations. Sarah stood at the edge of the group, helmet under her arm, eyes scanning the big screen where drone footage replayed the breach in grainy infrared. The bunker complex looked smaller. From above, almost harmless, you'd never guess it had been the center of a 6-month siege. When the debrief broke up, Master Sergeant Davis crossed the room toward her. His usual sharpness was gone. He looked at her like a man trying to reconcile two conflicting truths, the doubts he'd held and the reality in front of him. "Mitchell," he said, "you just rewrote the book." She almost laughed, but didn't. "One shot doesn't rewrite the book." "Maybe not," he said. "But it changes the chapter headings." He hesitated, then added, "I misread you. I thought the tremor was the kind of thing you hide. Turns out it's the kind of thing you learn from." Sarah didn't gloat. She just nodded. "I told you. It's not instability. It's data." Corporal Williams' eagle eye was more direct. He came up grinning, shaking his head. "Ma'am, I'd been spotting for 5 years. I'd never seen anyone track that much data in real time. You weren't just shooting, you were computing. I don't even know what you were compensating for half the time." She smirked. "Some of it's just knowing where to look. You ever gonna teach me?" "Maybe." She shouldered her rifle case. "If you're willing to unlearn half of what you've been taught." 2 hours later, she was alone in a small briefing room. The hum of the generators faint through the canvas walls. She was supposed to be writing her mission report, but the words on the screen felt hollow compared to the day they described. 3,520 meters looked clinical. Stripped of the hours of waiting, the calculations layered on calculations. The moment when she decided not to take the first shot, she thought about that decision more than the shot she eventually took. Waiting had gone against every order. Every instinct drilled into her during training, and yet it had been right. Had she fired earlier, before she understood the movement of those 2 men on the lower level, the siege might not have ended the way it did. The hostages might not all be alive. That wasn't in the official report, but she knew when the helicopters came to ferry them back to base. The air outside Glacier was brittle with cold. Snowflakes drifted in the searchlights, melting the second they hit her gear. She climbed aboard, strapping in, rifle secured between her knees again. By the time they landed at Quantico, 2 days later, the story had already leaked. Not the details. The operation was still classified, but the numbers. Record-breaking shot and 6-month siege. The press had a way of getting exactly enough to make a headline. Sarah avoided the media circus, staying in restricted areas until the initial wave passed. But even inside the base, the whispers followed her. Some in admiration, some in disbelief, some in the same quiet skepticism she'd felt since sniper school. As if her success was an outlier rather than the product of skill. She didn't mind. She hadn't done it for them. A week after the mission, she was called to a secure conference room. Around the table were not just military brass, but representatives from federal law enforcement, FBI, ATF, Homeland Security. Screens on the walls displayed ballistic charts, thermal imaging data, and a freeze frame of her shot taken from a drone overhead. Colonel Jackson opened the meeting. "We're here to debrief Sergeant Mitchell on her methodology, specifically how she compensated for environmental factors beyond the current sniper doctrine." Sarah kept her answers precise, professional. She broke down the ballistic calculations, the way she layered environmental readings, how she synchronized her body's stress tremors with her breathing to create a stability window others didn't have. Some of them took notes, some just stared at her, the skepticism still there. One of the FBI representatives leaned forward. "Sergeant, you're saying the physiological stress indicators most of our evaluators see as disqualifying can actually be an advantage?" "Yes, sir," she said without hesitation. "If you understand them and train for them. Most people try to suppress their stress responses. I trained to read mine." That was the first time she saw a few heads. Nod. The meeting ended with more questions than answers. But the seed was planted. Within months, the FBI would begin integrating elements of her approach into its advanced sniper courses. They'd call it the Phantom Protocol, a name she hadn't chosen but couldn't seem to shake. She didn't celebrate, not in the way people expected. No big parties, no public speeches. That wasn't who she was. Instead, on her first day off, she drove 3 hours out of Quantico, into the kind of empty winter countryside where the roads are 2 lanes and the snow piles at the fences. She stopped at an old range she hadn't been to in years, the kind with plywood benches and faded warning signs. It was empty. The wind was the only sound, steady and cold. She set up a target at 600 meters, not a record, not even close, and went prone in the snow. The air was sharp in her lungs, her hands bare against the cold stock of the rifle. The tremor started almost immediately, the cold amplifying it. She smiled, and then she shot until the sun dipped behind the hills. When she got back to base that night, there was a message waiting for her. Not from the brass, not from the FBI, from the mayor of Cedar Falls, the largest town in Three Rivers Valley. It was short. "Thank you for bringing our families home safe." She read it twice, then pinned it inside her locker door. That was the only recognition she needed. 3 months after Devil's Canyon, Sarah walked into the Marine Corps' Advanced Marksmanship Research Program at Quantico as its newest and youngest lead instructor. The hallway smelled faintly of gun oil and whiteboard markers, a mix that made her think of both the range and a classroom. This was where the Corps experimented with new ballistics tech, tested unconventional methods, and pushed doctrine into places most Marines never got to see. On the wall near the entrance, someone had pinned a printed headline, "The shot that should have been impossible." She ignored it, but it followed her down the hall like a shadow. Her first class was a mix of Marines, federal snipers, and foreign military observers. Most were older than her. Some had more combat tours, but all of them were here because of what she'd done in Montana. She didn't start with a story. She started with a question. How many of you know your body's real stress signature? A few hands half raised. Most just stared. Sarah set down her rifle on the table in front of her. I'm not talking about heart rate or adrenaline dumps. I'm talking about the microsignals your nervous system sends under pressure tremors. Breath cadence changes, subtle visual distortions. The stuff you don't notice until you train yourself to notice. She let the silence hang a moment before continuing. Most sniper schools teach you to suppress those. I'm going to teach you to use them. The Phantom Protocol, as it was now officially called, wasn't a fixed set of steps. It was a philosophy, a way of treating the shooter's body as part of the firing solution, not just a delivery mechanism they practiced for hours in. The environmental simulator, where wind machines, shifting temperature zones, and varying humidity replicated real-world extremes. Sarah would walk behind them, watching the tiny movements of their hands on the trigger guard, the rise and fall of their shoulders. Stop fighting this shake, she told one Marine, kneeling beside him. It's giving you timing data. You're treating it like noise when it's actually part of the signal. It was strange to see her own method in other hands. Some took to it quickly, their groups tightening on the target. Others fought it, mistrusting what felt counterintuitive. She didn't push those ones. She'd learned the hard way that you can't force someone to see the value in what they think is a flaw. The FBI sent its own contingent for cross-training. One of them, a wiry veteran with a face like weathered oak, approached her during a break. I read the unredacted after-action from Devil's Canyon, he said. You didn't take the first shot window. No, she said simply. That wasn't in the public version. It wasn't the right shot. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Good call. The restraint impressed me more than the record. Her days became a rhythm of teaching, testing, and refining. The research program developed new ballistic calculators, optics with better thermal compensation readings, and even heart rate sense triggers tools, inspired by her shot but designed to work for others. She was in the lab one afternoon when a young corporal named Reyes came to find her. "Ma'am, I just made my first sub-MOA group at 1,000 meters using your breathing tremor sync. Didn't think it would work." "It worked," Sarah smiled. "It's not mine anymore, Reyes. Once you use it, it's yours." But outside the range in the lab, the shot still defined her. At briefings, in casual introductions, even in conversation with people she barely knew, it always came back to that day. Some treated her like a legend, others like a statistical anomaly. One night, after a long day on the range, she found herself sitting alone in her apartment, the quiet pressing in. She poured herself a glass of water, set it on the table, and watched her hand as she lifted it. The tremor was still there, faint and steady. It no longer felt like something to prove, but it did feel like something that carried a weight. In the summer, she was invited to a joint NATO marksmanship symposium. In Norway, she stood on a stage before an audience of uniforms from a dozen nations, breaking down the Devil's Canyon shot in diagrams and slow-motion footage. When she finished, a British sniper in the front row raised a hand. "Sergeant Mitchell, with all respect, what happens when someone else takes a longer shot? Do you feel like you'll lose what makes you, you?" She considered the question. No, the shot was never the point. What matters is what you learn from it, and how you use it to change the way people think about what's possible. She meant it, but on the flight home, staring out over the Atlantic, she realized something. As much as she didn't chase the record chased her. Every time her name came up, it came with a number 3,520 meters. That number had become both a door and a chain. Back at Quantico, her classes grew. The FBI formalized its adoption of the Phantom Protocol, and a TF followed. Rumors spread about integrating aspects into special operations sniper courses. With each success, Sarah felt a strange mix of pride and unease. Pride, because her method was helping shooters push their limits. Unease, because she knew the doctrine's origins weren't in theory. They were in a day where 50 hostages could have died if she'd been wrong. Late one evening, long after most of the facility had gone quiet, she walked the empty indoor range. The air smelled faintly of burnt powder from the day's drills. She took her rifle from the rack, loaded a single round, and went prone at the farthest lane. The target was standard issue, the kind you could buy at any sporting goods store. Through the scope, it looked closer than it was 600 meters in this controlled environment. She slowed her breathing, felt the tremor align, and squeezed. The round punched clean through the center. She smiled faintly, rolled onto her back, and stared at the ceiling. The shot at Devil's Canyon had changed her career, maybe even her life. But moments like this, just her, a rifle, and the quiet discipline of a perfect shot, were why she'd started down this path in the first place. The invitation came in a plain white envelope, no official seal, no military markings. Just her name, written in a neat, deliberate hand. Inside was a folded letter and a small photo. The photo showed a row of smiling faces outside a diner. The kind with chrome trim and a faded neon sign. In the middle was a man holding a little girl on his shoulders, both waving at the camera. The letter was from the mayor of Cedar Falls. "The people of the Three Rivers Valley would like to thank you in person. We're hosting a gathering this weekend. No press, no politics, just us." She read it twice before setting it down. It was a 6-hour drive through mountain roads, the kind that snaked between cliffs and rivers. As she got closer, the peaks rose higher. Dusted with early snow, the air felt thinner, cleaner, but heavier somehow. She hadn't been this close to Devil's Canyon since the operation. The town of Cedar Falls was small enough that you could drive through it in 3 minutes. Storefronts with hand-painted signs, a feed supply shop, a post office with a flag that had seen better days. The streets were quiet, except for a few kids riding bikes. their voices carrying in the cold air. The community center was a low brick building near the river. Outside, a few trucks and sedans were parked, their tires crusted with road salt. When she stepped inside, the warmth hit her first, followed by the sound laughter. Conversations, the clink of coffee mugs, and then silence. It wasn't the heavy kind of silence she'd felt in briefing rooms or after gunfire. This was different, curious, searching. Someone near the front said quietly, "That's her." The mayor was there to greet her, a stocky man in his 50s, with weathered skin and the handshake of someone who still worked with his hands. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said, his voice warm but steady. "We're honored you came." She started to answer, but he gestured for her to follow him toward the center of the room. "These are some of the folks who were trapped here during the siege," he said, "and some of the hostages you helped bring home." The first person who stepped forward was a woman in her 30s, her eyes bright but glassy with tears. "My brother was in that bunker," she said. "You don't know me, but I've been carrying this picture of him since the day they took him. He came home because of you." Sarah didn't know what to say. She just shook her hand. One by one, they came. A man who'd been delivering supplies when the siege started. A teenager who had spent weeks sleeping in a school gym because her neighborhood was cut off. A retired nurse who'd been one of the 50 federal agents held hostage, who told Sarah in a low voice about the moment she heard the gunshot and knew something had changed. "You could feel it," the nurse said, like the air shifted. "We didn't know what happened, but we knew. Something broke their hold on us." Later, the mayor led her outside to the back porch of the community center. The river moved slow and dark under the moonlight. "You've probably been told that shot ended the siege," he said. "And it did, in a way. But you should know it wasn't just a tactical win. It gave people hope back, that valley. We'd started to think no one could reach us, and then you did." Sarah leaned against the railing, the cold wood pressing into her palms. "I didn't do it alone." "No," he said. "But you were the one who took the shot, no one else." "Good. That matters here." Back inside, the gathering became less formal. People drifted into smaller conversations. Someone brought out pie. She found herself sitting at a table with 3 of the former hostages. One of them, a quiet man with a lined face and a slow way of speaking, asked her what it was like to wait for the window to open. "It's not waiting," she said after a pause. "It's holding still until you can see exactly how the world is moving, and then deciding when to act." He nodded slowly. "That's what it felt like in there, like we were all just holding still, waiting for something to change." By the end of the night, she had shaken more hands than she could count. Some people cried. Some just looked at her like they didn't know how to thank her. And some, she could tell, didn't want to talk about it at all. That was fine. She knew not all wounds showed themselves to strangers. When she left, the mayor pressed the original photo from the envelope into her hand. "This belongs to you now," he said. She started to refuse, but he shook his head. "You earned it." The drive back was long and quiet. Somewhere along the mountain road, she pulled over at a turnout. From there, she could see the distant outline of Devil's Canyon under the starlight, a jagged scar against the sky. She thought about the people in that community center. The girl on the bike, the nurse, the man with the slow voice. And for the first time since the shot, she felt the weight of it, not the technical challenge, not the record, but the human lives it had shifted from one column to another, back at Quantico. The next morning was like any other classes to teach. Students on the range, data to review. But she carried the photo in her rifle case now, tucked between the foam padding, not as a trophy, as a reminder that the shot had been about more than proving herself, more than the number. It had been about restoring something people thought they'd lost. The months after Cedar Falls settled into a strange rhythm. Sarah's days were predictable. Classroom lectures in the mornings, range drills in the afternoons, research lab time after dark. The work mattered, She could see it in the way her students' shots tightened. Their awareness deepened, but there was a quiet restlessness in her chest. She hadn't been in the field since Devil's Canyon. It wasn't that she was being sidelined. On paper, her current role was a promotion. Lead instructor, program designer, one of the youngest Marines to direct an advanced marksmanship curriculum at Quantico. But every time a mission briefing slid across someone's desk, her name didn't come up. Some of it was politics. She knew that. Some of it was the record. The 3,520 meters that made her both an asset and a symbol. The brass didn't want to risk the woman who'd made the shot on an op that might end without glory. And some of it, she suspected, was something else entirely. They didn't want to find out if she could do it again. One night, she stayed late at the range. The kind of quiet after-hours session where the sound of a single shot seemed to echo forever. The target was at 1,000 meters. Easy, compared to the canyon. She dropped prone, cheek to the stock, breath sinking with the steady tremor in her hand. The shot was perfect, dead center. But instead of satisfaction, she felt a flicker of doubt. What if her best work was already behind her? The next morning, she sat in the observation booth watching a group of new FBI trainees run the Phantom Protocol drills. One of them, a tall, impatient former SWAT marksman, kept breaking position to fix his posture after every shot. Sarah leaned over the microphone. "Stop correcting your position. Your body's natural adjustments are part of your calibration. Trust them." The man hesitated, then nodded. His next 3 shots formed a tight cluster. She knew the method worked. She could prove it 100 times over in others, but proving it again herself, that was the itch she couldn't scratch. 2 weeks later, she got a knock on her office door. It was Colonel Jackson, not in dress uniform, but in field fatigues. "Walk with me," the colonel said. They stepped into the corridor. Jackson's stride clipped but unhurried. "There's chatter about a high-value target extraction overseas. Nothing confirmed yet, but if it happens, it'll require extreme-range overwatch." Sarah felt the old focus spark in her chest. "You want me on it?" Jackson didn't answer. "Right away. Command split, some want you there. Others think you're more valuable here. Training the next 10 shooters who can do what you did." Sarah kept her face still. "And you?" "I think you need to decide whether you're a teacher who once made history, or a sniper who can still change how the story ends." That night, she lay awake in her apartment. Staring at the ceiling, she thought about Devil's Canyon. Not just the shot, but the waiting, the restraint, the way every decision in those hours had been hers alone. She thought about Cedar Falls, the faces in that community center, the photo in her rifle case. She thought about the silence after the shot, the long exhale when she knew it had been right. The next morning, she was on the range before dawn. No one else was there. She set the target as far as the automated system would allow, then lay prone. In the frost-covered grass, she didn't imagine the canyon. She didn't imagine hostages or commanders waiting on her call. She imagined nothing at all. Just the wind on her cheek, the weight of the rifle in her hands, the way her pulse and her breathing and her tremor all spoke the same quiet language. The shot cracked. The paper tore dead center. She smiled, not because it was perfect, but because it reminded her that she hadn't lost it. When Colonel Jackson called 2 days later with the formal mission order, Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'm in." The deployment orders were stamped urgent. No press, no brief for the wider units. The target was deep in a mountainous border region overseas. A warlord whose network had crippled supply routes and who was about to vanish across the frontier. Intel was thin. The terrain was worse. The only feasible extraction plan hinged on taking him down from a ridge nearly 2 miles away. While special operations teams moved in to secure the compound, Sarah arrived with her spotter, not Eagle Eye this time, but a younger Marine named Holly, fresh out of an advanced reconnaissance unit. He'd studied her Devil's Canyon shot in training, but this was his first mission with her. You really think we can hit him from here? Holly asked as they crouched behind a wind-scarred rock face. Sarah adjusted her scope, her breath steady. I don't think. I calculate. And then I decide. The compound sat in a bowl of rock and dust, its outer walls patched from years of fighting. The target was expected to appear in a courtyard to address his men before moving to a waiting convoy. They had one chance. Holly rattled off the readings. Range 3-4-9-8. Wind gusting 7 to 9 from the east. Temp 72 Fahrenheit. Pressure steady. Sarah let the numbers sink in, layering them with what her eyes told her. The shimmer above the sand. The flags on the wall moving in uneven waves. The faint swirl of dust devils across the courtyard. The tremor in her hand began. She welcomed it like an old friend. They had been in position for 4 hours when the target finally stepped into the courtyard. He wore a white headscarf, his posture confident, speaking to the gathered fighters like a man who believed no one could reach him. Hale's voice was low. Windows maybe 20 seconds before he goes inside. Sarah's finger rested on the trigger, not pressing yet. Watch the wind at his left shoulder. It's curling. Holly adjusted his spotting scope. Got it. She dialed her corrections. Drop, drift, spin drift, density altitude. The same language she'd spoken in Montana. But the grammar was different here. The heat, the air density. The high desert winds 15 seconds, her breath slowed. The tremor matched her heartbeat. Every factor locked into place. Target acquired, she whispered. The shot cracked. A sharp concussion against the ridge. The bullet began its journey. 3.5 kilometers through heat, dust, and shifting air. Holly counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. The man in the courtyard dropped. His guards froze. Confusion rippling through the crowd. Then chaos. Some ran for cover. Others shouted orders. Impact, Holly confirmed. Sarah didn't watch the body. She watched the perimeter of the compound, the movement on the walls, the way the fighters hesitated instead of mounting an organized defense. Minutes later, the special operations team breached. The resistance collapsed in less than half an hour. By the time they were extracted, the sun was low and the ridge shadows stretched for miles. Harley was grinning, adrenaline still in his voice. You just did it again. Sarah shook her head. No, we just did it. Back at base. The mission debrief was short, clean execution. 0 friendly casualties. Target eliminated. But in the quiet afterward, Sarah found herself alone on the range behind the compound. The smell of dust and cordite in the air. She set her rifle down, resting her hands on the stock. The tremor was still there. Faint and steady. It wasn't a flaw. It never had been. It was the rhythm she'd learned to read. The signal inside the noise. That night, sitting under a sky scattered with stars, she thought about the path from Camp Pendleton to Devil's Canyon to this ridge half a world away. About the instructors who doubted her, the hostages she'd met, the students now learning the Phantom Protocol in classrooms and ranges she might never see. Sometimes, the world tried to define you by your limits, and sometimes those limits were only the edges of a map you hadn't finished drawing. When she returned to Quantico, Holly sent her a single-line message before they parted ways. Sometimes the person they think will shake is the one who holds the line. She pinned it next to the Cedar Falls photo inside her locker, and when her newest class asked her the question they all eventually asked, how did you make the shot? She gave them the same answer she always had. Every signal your body sends you is data. Learn it, read it, use it. What makes you different might be what makes you capable of the impossible. She paused, just long enough for the silence to carry weight, because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.